One of the challenges lots of parents face today is how to deal with a teenager. A huge challenge. And you find there's almost a kind of defiance. We find there's a lot of anger. I heard some people phoning me up, a mother telling me, Brother Edris, I'm running from home, I can't handle my son anymore, right? And this is the reality. But I think, all this can change. Teenagers are trying to find their space. As one psychologist said, that teenagers see the mom and dad as an emperor and empress without clothes, a source of embarrassment. The friends are the critical part of their life. And teenagers are going through a very exciting time, and also a very demanding time. Hormones are going all over the place, right? Their friends become a critical part of their life. And you find that the parents are a source of embarrassment, and they don't understand me. And we as parents need to do certain things differently. We tend, many of us, to lecture them, to seminize. We do not ask them what their perspective is. Often they come with very fresh perspectives, some many insightful things. And sometimes they may say, you know what, Daddy, and I ask people to do this, and one of the things that I say to people, if you do not change within 48 hours after a presentation, it's unlikely you're going to change. If your husband or wife is not here, if you not discuss some of the issues that have been raised here, I find that problematic. If you've got a son, if you do not do things differently, I find that problematic. And one of the things that we need to do is this, especially in husband and wife, we need to talk together and say, you know what do we do? How do we respond to our son? Because the worst thing ever, when the mom and dad, as I said earlier on, have a diametrically opposite viewpoint how to bring up the child. And children are children, they can manipulate one against the other. Very, very important. I recall the story of one incident where the father and mother were very concerned about the behavior of the young daughter. And I said to them, I would speak to your daughter on one condition. If there's something you need to do differently, do you promise you're going to do it differently? Do you make that promise? They said, yes. Then I'm prepared to do that. Then I asked the mom and dad, tell me about how you raise the child. So the mother said to me that the father is very harsh, it inflicts corporal punishment, and what she was doing consciously was becoming overly indulgent to compensate for that, right? And what was the problem they had with the child? The child started drinking alcohol. So I went to the house and she locked herself in the room. She wasn't prepared to engage me. The father barged into the room. He said to her, sit down and talk to him. It was a very difficult start for me. Then I tried to allay affairs. She said to me, I don't know who you are. Who are you? I said to her, I've come here because I care. Youth understand me. I haven't come to lecture you. And she told me, in fact, I don't require a lecture or counseling, my parents require it. And then she said to me, hi man, what's wrong with drinking, Why are they getting so upset? That was okay, I was managing so far. Then when she told me something else that really, I was bereft of words, I was shocked. She said to me, oh, by the way, I do not believe in my father's and mother's religion. Really, I could not tell her anything. I said a few things to her, and she said, anyway, it's 9 o'clock now, I spent 10 minutes with her, I'm watching my favorite television program, and I suggest that you call the conversation off. Now, what do I tell the parents? I said to them, and something that I tell people, it's almost a paradox. I say to them, when your child does something wrong, you love him, but despise the action. You love him. He must still feel loved by you. So I said to them, I want both of you to start loving her, engaging her. Alhamdulillah, I heard subsequently, everything is fine. I'm not suggesting that was the main reason why things have happened. And this is the whole point, you see. When kids do not feel your love, often they say that my father only advises me, only advises. My mom does the same thing, right? I'm unhappy in this place. I don't get what I want. They don't see to my needs. These are things that young teenagers speak about these days, right? But they must understand. And this is the whole thing. I suggest to people something that I believe very strongly, that we must prepare our young people for the turbulent teenage life. We've got to tell them, you know, Muhammad, there'll be a time in your life, will be coming soon, you know. Let them know. So when they go through it, they remember your words will begin to resonate. But what are some of the practical things you can do? I believe, firstly, of course, they must know you pray for them, that you love them, that you hug them. Give them an opportunity to speak what's in their heart, because a recurring theme is that revealing is healing. You must avoid humiliation and put down. The worst thing for a teenager is to be humiliated. I tell people, you know what? Praise your son in public, of course advisedly, and chastise him in private. Never do it in front of his peers. That's the worst thing ever. He feels a sense of alienation, he feels humiliated, a sense of embarrassment, he finds it difficult to face his own friends. The other critical advice that you need to do is, whilst you know you want to give them some kind of advice, do not micromanage their life. You know, I think you're underestimating their capabilities. Because teenagers are really potential young adults who are trying to see the world with different eyes, right? We need to do that. In a study that was done, this was quite interesting. They found that 61% of teenagers are sad. 36% of teenagers feel hopeless, they have no future. And 34%, for me this is very, very sad, contemplate suicide. They contemplate suicide because they are going through their own turbulence. The experiential world around peers, there is often negative peer pressure. They perhaps had low self-esteem. They find it difficult to cope. They want a sense of belonging. So if you can create a culture and environment, I really believe that the teenage years can be a time of excitement, a time of engagement, where they feel that you have supportive parents that can advise you, support you, where they can themselves share with you some of the issues that are impinging on them and perhaps creating some frustration.
I think just to add to that, something that I've learned over the years, I'm the eldest in my family, so I saw all my siblings kind of through their teenage years, and then also relatives and so on. And I found that in the family and extended family and friends, communities, etc., those children that tend to disappoint their parents or their communities in some way, if you go back deep enough, it's the families and the parents that created those vulnerabilities in the young people and then left them out to other people. And one particular example is a young girl of 17 left home and married someone who was I think just over 40, and I think the marriage has still lasted, but the thing is I could see quite clearly as an outsider the lack of love that she had from her father, and she never saw him. He was in a polygamous marriage. It was just such a horrible situation. I could see when I met her husband that she found something that she craved her entire life. And it was a massive vulnerability that they had created in her. So that was a consequence. And what you said about can you deal with the consequence of what you do in your own house, I think there's results of our actions, and we have to be prepared to work with it once it happens.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we need to ask ourselves, as children growing up, what are some of the fundamental needs? And how do you meet those needs? Because often what happens, the Islamic principles of parenting, it is said the first 7 years is bonding. Another variation, the child is a master, first 7 years. From 7 to 14 is a time of instruction and learning. After 14, you become the child's confidant. Often the bonding has not taken place, right? The other important thing is this: the children grow up sometimes, although they are loved, they erroneously believe they are not loved. You've got to demonstrate that. And when there are some gaps, some needs that are not met, you find others, they become vulnerable to others. And their hearts and minds are seduced by it. And afterwards they realize, my gosh, I got myself into some trouble here,
think also with teenagers across the board, when you have a fractured childhood, you confuse, when you don't understand love, it's very easy to confuse love with sex.
Correct.
And this is why then in those vulnerable years, say post-12 primarily, 12 to 16, 17 I would say, is that you can find often people get into a sticky situation with the opposite sex because they are actually looking for love in an affirming way as opposed to sex really.
Correct,
but
yeah.
they think that it's they're seduced by sex because you think that that's what it is. And I think our parents don't understand how critical it is, as you've been saying, that to have this expression of love that children experience it, to see them through those teenage years. And I would just add on top of that, that's one aspect of particularly living in a highly sexualized society, world that we live in. And I think, we criticize the West for being highly sexualized, but the Muslim world itself is thoroughly sexualized in many of the aspects of the things that we do. And so it's very confusing for young people. But then the expectations of parents on their children, because I know I've worked with families for over 25 years, is that when their kids are young, the kids, of course, they love everything and they agree with the parents. Suddenly they reach they've not prepared for teenage years. And suddenly they say, oh my God, they're not doing what I want them to do.
Correct,
but what parents are doing, they're not nurturing their children, they're moulding their children.
Yes,
They'll send them to all the extracurricular activities. They want them to be a doctor, dentist, lawyer, accountant, whatever. They want them to be perfect Muslims. They want them to finish their Quran by a certain age. But nobody's teaching them depth of character. There was a posting in Facebook, which it was a long passage, which one of it says, education actually is about the mind, about building the mind. But I added onto it, also as the mind, it's about building character. And we don't bring up our children to really develop their strength of character and their potential. And I think that's what we forget.
Yes. In fact, I came across this, they say if you bring up your children how you are brought up, you rob them of their tomorrow. Yeah. It's a very powerful statement because our society, the landscape has changed radically. The way we communicate, the transport, we're part of a global village. That today, for example, in inverted commas, sin is accessible 24 hours a day, right? And the kind of things that used to titillate us, excite us, whatever it was, is completely different today, right? And it's a difficult time for young people. The experiential world is frightening. They've got to make decisions all the time, every time, right? And we need to understand that. And what they want is empathy. They want, to be allowed, within, of course, within a perspective, that to make certain mistakes, you understand? And we need to forgive them. Because, sadly, many of us are out of our depth. We do not know what advice to give. We do not know how to engage them at that level. We are almost anachronistic, you don't belong, archaic often. And that's the point. The point is this, that we must, it is not fortuitous that the first ayat to be revealed is Iqra. We have not progressed. We do not read and contemplate and understand things around us. And that will make a huge difference. I think it is erroneous to believe that every teenager will go through this pain alone. But in homes where there's understanding, deep understanding, that the teenagers themselves know how to manage their anger because they know there's an element of respect in this household. The values are abiding values. The kind of love and affection between husband and wife, the way we treat other people, they do not forget who they are. At least they can come home and say, Mommy, today I went through this, Ma. Today, Ma, I saw this girl, Ma, and I liked her. Now, there are many ways of responding. How can you do this? How can you feel this? Right? And that's wrong. Let them speak about their feelings, but help them to manage those feelings. If they can do that, it's pity we don't have the time. In a survey that was done, they asked about 300 odd teenagers, what are 8 topics you like your parents to speak about? And it was very intriguing. And one of the topics they spoke about, and maybe I'll give you all the 8 topics, was if mommy and daddy are going through a problem, we should be the first one to know. Look at that, right? And we want the last one to know. Second thing, dad and mommy must talk to us about controversial issues. like homosexuality, lesbianism. We must speak about other big issues. For example, why should we believe in God? Why? Why should we have that kind of belief? We would like our parents to speak about current affairs, to know what's happening around the world. We would like our parents to speak about the way they've been brought up without using that to lecture to us. We'd like our parents to know our friends and to affirm our friends. You understand? So that's what they want. They want engagement. They want that. The mistake we make is that part or a critical part of the engagement is to elicit the opinion. What do you feel? And I recall this. As a teenager, my dad had this wonderful habit at that time to cut out articles from a newspaper, especially good letters to the editor, and he used to paste it neatly on his scrapbook, and he had tons of it. And one day there was this ironic article written about Basil de Oliveira, who was supposed to come to South Africa because of politics at that time. It was written in a very ironic tone.
It's a young generation.
He was a cricketer in our days, very well known. A South African cricketer who became a citizen of UK, was chosen by England, but because South African apartheid regime would not want to give him a visa, allow him to play. So my father asked me to read what I thought about the article. And I was a teenager. I read the article, I gave him an opinion, and my father was quite fascinated by it. He said, wow. And when his friends came home that evening, he said, Idris, would you come here, please? I want you to share that opinion you shared with me. Look at that. Only now, when I say now, I mean the relative past, I understand what he was trying to do. He was empowering me. He was showing me respect that you also can say things, for elders. For example, in the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked a group of Sahaba a question, none of them knew, but the young boy, right? He knew the answer, and he didn't say it. And when he told his father, he said, Daddy, or whatever, I think it was Umar or someone, he said, I knew the answer. He said, why did you say it? You should have said it. You should have said it. You know what I'm saying to you? So the whole thing is this, that we often say young people should be seen but never heard. That dynamic has to change radically.